What happens when the man you trust the most puts you to the ultimate test? What if everything you believed in was shattered by the one person you thought would always protect you? This is the story of a betrayal so deep, it breaks a woman's heart, and yet, in the end, it might just be the key to her freedom. Will love survive this test, or will it crumble under the weight of deception? Stay with me till the end and discover how one woman chooses to rebuild her life from the pieces of her shattered past. And if you've found yourself drawn into her journey, make sure to subscribe to join this emotional roller coaster. You won't want to miss what's coming next. It was a cool autumn morning when James decided to test his daughter-in-law, Clara. The city streets were bustling with people, but Clara walked alone, her heels clicking against the concrete. The sound echoed in the empty spaces between the crowded shops. James, wearing a tattered coat and a scruffy beard, sat hunched on the corner of the street. He looked nothing like the successful businessman he truly was. His hair was matted, his eyes weary with the pretense of a beggar. Clara passed by, her attention caught by the man sitting on the ground. He looked like he had been through hardships, his hands outstretched, begging for change. She hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of her decision. Her heart began to race. She had always been taught to help those in need, to show kindness. But something about the man's eyes, something unsettling, made her second-guess her instincts. James watched her closely, knowing the moment of truth had come. Would she be the compassionate woman he thought she was, or would she turn away like the others? Clara stopped. She looked at him, her fingers brushing the money in her purse. She wanted to help, but something about the man made her feel uneasy. As she stood there, the world around her seemed to fade. The sounds of the street, the chatter, the car engines, all blended into a dull hum. Her senses sharpened. Then, the beggar spoke in a voice that sent chills down her spine. I've seen many people walk by. None of them stopped. None of them cared. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice, it sounded so familiar. Her pulse quickened as the realization dawned on her. The beggar smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I see you've recognized me, he said, his voice now full of a strange satisfaction. Clara's mind raced, her body rooted to the spot. This was no ordinary beggar. This was her father-in-law, the man she had been married to for 3 years. The shock hit her like a wave. Her eyes widened in disbelief, her mouth dry. How had he come to be here, pretending to be someone else? James stood up slowly, shedding the tattered coat, revealing the expensive suit underneath. Clara took a step back, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. You were testing me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her stomach twisted with a mix of confusion and anger. James looked at her with a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I had to see if you were truly as kind-hearted as I believed, or if you, like so many others, would turn your back on someone in need." Clara's thoughts swirled in a whirlwind of emotions. The disappointment in her heart was palpable. But there was something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The street, once so busy, now seemed eerily quiet. Her mind was a battleground of betrayal and shock. The air around her seemed heavy, pressing in as if it were alive, watching her. She didn't know what to feel anymore. This was a test, yes, but it had crossed a line. "Clara," James said, his voice suddenly softer, almost apologetic. "I only wanted to know you better." But the damage was done. The weight of the moment hung in the air, suffocating her. Clara took another step back. Her hands were trembling, and she could barely form a coherent thought. This was not the father-in-law she had thought she knew. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have. The world outside resumed its normal pace, but Clara felt trapped in a moment that would never let go. This was more than just a test. This was a breach of trust, an act that would change everything. And as Clara turned to walk away, her heart heavy with unanswered questions, James' gaze lingered on her retreating figure, a flicker of regret passing through his eyes. But it was too late for regrets. The damage had been done. Clara's steps were slow, deliberate, but her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and pain. Each footfall on the pavement seemed to echo, the sound stretching through the silence that had settled around her. She had come into this world of marriage, of family, with trust and hope. Now, all of that seemed to be crumbling, piece by piece, in front of her eyes. Her heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't just the shock of the moment, it was the realization that her father-in-law, the man who had always been a figure of dignity, had orchestrated this cruel charade. She could feel the sting of betrayal seeping into her soul, a sharp, cold ache that gnawed at her insides. She thought of her husband, Daniel. How could he have known nothing of this? Or had he, too, been part of this twisted game? Questions tore through her mind, relentless and unforgiving. She tried to steady her breath, to push away the tears threatening to spill over, but they came anyway, uninvited, like the flood of emotions that overtook her. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, the world seemed distant, as if she were walking through a dream. Clara stopped at the end of the street, looking down at the bustling city that had once felt so alive and full of promise. But now it felt foreign, like a place where she no longer belonged. A man, walking past her, glanced at her with a quizzical look, but she couldn't bring herself to care. She felt as if she were moving in a parallel world, separate from everything around her. She was no longer a part of the crowd. She was an island of raw emotion, suspended in time. Her hand tightened around the strap of her purse, her knuckles white. She wanted to scream, to confront James, to demand answers for this cruel test, but she couldn't bring herself to turn around. There was a numbness creeping over her heart, and it paralyzed her, keeping her from action. But then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed in her bag. A message. She hesitated, standing still for a long moment. Her heart raced, not knowing what to expect. Was it Daniel? With trembling fingers, Clara pulled out her phone and unlocked the screen. Her stomach dropped when she saw the name on the message. It was from Daniel. "Clara, we need to talk. I'm sorry about what happened today. I know this is hard, but there's something you need to understand. Meet me at the old cafe, the one where we first met." Her mind spun. The old cafe. The place where they had fallen in love. She felt a sudden pang of longing, mixed with deep sadness. She hadn't been back there since their honeymoon. It had been their place, where everything had felt right, where the world had made sense. But now, the memories of that place seemed distant, like echoes in a fog. The warmth, the laughter, the shared dreams, all of it felt tainted now, marred by the events that had just unfolded. She stood there for a long time, staring at the screen, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, they all tangled together, fighting for dominance. But beneath it all, there was one truth she couldn't escape. She loved Daniel. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the lies, she loved him. And for that reason, she knew she had to go. With a deep breath, Clara turned on her heels and started walking towards the cafe. Each step felt heavier than the last, her body aching from the weight of her emotions. The city around her was still as noisy and bustling as before, but to Clara, it felt like she was in a different world. She arrived at the cafe after what felt like an eternity. The small bell above the door rang as she entered, the familiar scent of coffee and baked goods filling her senses. But the warmth of the place, the comfort it once offered, now felt hollow. Daniel was sitting at a corner table, his back to the door. She hesitated for a moment before walking over and sitting down across from him. He looked up, his face pale and filled with regret. "Clara," his voice broke the silence, and she felt her chest tighten at the sound of his pain. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would he do this? Why would you let him test me like that?" Daniel's eyes searched hers, and for a moment, Clara saw a flicker of guilt in his expression. "I didn't know, Clara. I swear to you, I didn't know. He told me he wanted to know you better, to see if you were truly a good person." Clara's heart twisted, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. She had hoped. No, She had trusted that Daniel would protect her, that he would stand by her side. But now she saw the truth. Her voice was barely a whisper. So, this was all a test. Daniel's eyes welled up with tears as well.
Yes.
But it was wrong. I see that now. I should have stopped him. I should have protected you. The words were an apology, but they felt like they were falling on deaf ears. Clara looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Her mind was racing, but there was one thing she couldn't shake. A sudden thought struck her, cold and sharp. If James had gone this far to test her, what else was he hiding? What else had he been plotting? Clara, Daniel's voice pulled her back to the present. I love you. I never wanted you to feel betrayed. Please understand, I never wanted any of this to happen. Clara looked up at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. The man she had loved, the man she had built her life with, was sitting in front of her, broken and vulnerable. But she didn't know if she could ever look at him the same way again. She stood up slowly, her heart torn in two. I need time, Daniel. I need to think about everything. I can't just forget what happened today. With that, she turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Daniel behind. The door chimed softly behind her, but the sound was like a final echo in her mind. She stepped back into the busy streets, the same streets that had felt like home just hours ago. But now, they felt like a stranger's world. The wind picked up, and Clara pulled her jacket tighter around her, the chill of the evening cutting through her thoughts. She needed time. Time to heal. Time to figure out what was real. As she walked away, the world around her seemed to fade once again, leaving her with nothing but the sound of her own heartbeat and the haunting question of whether trust could ever be rebuilt. Clara's steps grew slower, each one echoing in the stillness of her mind. The world around her seemed to blur, the cityscape now reduced to nothing more than a distant memory. Her thoughts twisted, spiraling into the darkness of doubt. She had trusted him. She had loved him, with all the sincerity in her heart. But now, everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, felt like a fragile illusion. The cold wind whipped against her face, stinging her cheeks, but it couldn't numb the ache that had settled deep inside her. It was as if her heart was suspended, caught in a storm of confusion and betrayal. Every corner of her life now seemed to hold a secret she hadn't been allowed to see. She wandered aimlessly, unsure of where she was headed, as though her very sense of direction had been taken from her. The city, once familiar, now felt like a maze of sharp edges and disorienting twists. Her mind replayed every moment she had spent with Daniel, the way he had held her hand when they first met, the promises they had made to each other. She had believed in those promises. Now they felt like whispers in the wind, fading with each step she took. A sudden sharp noise broke her from her thoughts. It was the sound of footsteps, quick and deliberate, behind her. Clara froze, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel his presence, like a shadow creeping up behind her. Clara, wait. Daniel's voice was strained, desperate, and it echoed in the empty street like a plea. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the tears threatening to spill again, but she couldn't face him.
Not yet.
Not after everything. She quickened her pace, her mind telling her to keep moving, to leave it all behind. She didn't want to face him, didn't want to hear the words he was sure to say. But the footsteps behind her didn't stop. They were getting closer, and soon she felt his hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle, pulling her to a halt. Clara, Daniel said again, this time his voice quieter, softer, almost broken. Please look at me. She turned slowly, her body tense, her mind in turmoil. Her eyes locked with his, and in them, she saw the pain, the rawness of regret, and something else she hadn't expected, fear. Why? She whispered, the word barely leaving her lips, but it was enough to convey the weight of everything she felt. Why would you let him do that to me? You should have stopped him, Daniel. You should have protected me. Daniel's face crumpled, and for a moment, Clara saw him for what he truly was, a man who had made a terrible mistake, a man who loved her but had betrayed her trust. His hand reached out to her, trembling. "I never wanted this, Clara," he said, his voice cracking. "You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you. My father, he thought it was the only way to test you, to see if you were the woman I thought you were. But I should have stopped him. I should have put an end to it." Clara's heart twisted with a mixture of anger and sorrow. The man she had chosen to spend her life with had allowed his father to manipulate her, to make her feel like she was nothing more than a subject of scrutiny. He had allowed her to be tested like an object in his game of control. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he had failed her in the worst possible way. But instead, she stood there, the words stuck in her throat. How could she even begin to express the depth of her hurt? How could she make him understand the devastation that had settled in her heart? "You don't understand," she whispered, shaking her head. "You don't understand what it feels like to trust someone, to love them with everything you have, and then find out it was all a lie. You've broken something in me, Daniel. Something I don't know if I can ever fix." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and he stepped closer. But Clara took a step back, away from him, her chest tightening with an emotion so raw, so painful, that she couldn't even bear to be near him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry for everything, Clara. But please, don't let this destroy us. We can work through this. I love you. I need you." Clara's heart clenched painfully at his words, but the more he spoke, the further away she felt. She wanted to believe him, to take him in her arms and tell him that everything would be okay.
But how could she?
How could she trust him again after all of this? How could she return to the life they had built together when it felt so fragile, so shattered? "I don't know what to do anymore," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever forget what's happened." The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Clara could feel the tension in the air, thick with unspoken words and unhealed wounds. She looked down at the ground, not wanting to meet his eyes, knowing that if she did, she would crumble. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll give you time. Whatever you need, Clara. But I'll never stop loving you. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Clara nodded slowly, though she didn't know if she could ever trust those words again. He might wait, but could she wait too? Could she bear the weight of this broken trust, or would it consume her from the inside out? "I need to go," Clara said, her voice small, her words carrying the weight of her heartache. She turned away from him, not waiting for him to stop her. She couldn't look back. Not now. Not yet. As she walked away, each step felt like a chasm opening between them. Every part of her screamed to go back, to make it right, to heal the wounds that had been so carelessly inflicted. But the deeper truth was that she needed time. Time to understand who she was without him. Time to understand if there was even a chance to rebuild the love they had once shared. The night was closing in, and Clara was alone in the city that had once felt like home. She didn't know where she was going, or if she would ever find her way back. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the painful clarity that sometimes, to find peace, one must first endure the pain of breaking. And as she disappeared into the crowd, her heart heavy with sorrow and uncertainty, the city continued to hum, indifferent to the breaking of a heart. Clara's footsteps quickened as she navigated the crowded streets, her chest tightening with every breath. The city, once full of promise and possibility, now felt like a cage. She walked through it as though she were a ghost, the familiar faces around her nothing more than fleeting shadows. The sound of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the hum of life, it all seemed muffled, as if the world had receded just far enough to let her experience her pain in private. With each step, she felt the weight of the past few hours settle deeper into her bones. She couldn't escape the image of Daniel's tear-streaked face, his voice pleading with her to stay. The words he had said were still ringing in her ears. "I love you. I need you. I'll wait." And yet, despite the sincerity in his voice, Clara could feel something inside her breaking, something irreplaceable. How could she ever trust him again? How could she return to the man who had let her be tested like an object? Her mind was a storm, the wind of doubt howling through her thoughts, drowning out the faint whispers of hope that tried to rise. Could I forgive him? Could I ever trust him with my heart again? Her heart ached with the emptiness of that question. She didn't know. A light drizzle began to fall, the misty rain adding to the melancholy of the evening. Clara pulled her coat tighter around her body, but it didn't help. The cold seemed to seep into her very soul, freezing the warmth she had once felt toward her husband. She wanted to run. She wanted to escape, to find somewhere, anywhere, where she could just be alone with her pain. But no matter how far she walked, the burden of betrayal clung to her like a second skin. Her phone buzzed again, breaking through the haze of her thoughts. She fumbled to pull it from her purse, almost too tired to care. It was a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she unlocked the screen. "Clara, it's James. I need to speak with you. Meet me at the old family estate, please. It's important." Clara felt her pulse quicken.
James.
Her father-in-law, the architect of this entire mess. The man who had manipulated her, testing her as though her emotions were a game. A cold wave of dread washed over her. Why would he want to meet her now? What could he possibly have to say that wouldn't just deepen the wound he had already caused? She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. A part of her wanted to ignore it. Why should I go to him? She thought bitterly. He's the one who orchestrated this nightmare. But another part of her, a part she didn't fully understand, felt compelled to meet him. Perhaps it was the need for answers. Or perhaps, deep down, she was searching for some kind of closure, something that would make sense of the madness that had unfolded over the past few hours. After a long moment of hesitation, she typed a simple response. "I'll be there." The rain had picked up, now falling in steady sheets, as Clara made her way to the outskirts of the city. The old family estate was on the edge of town, a sprawling mansion that seemed to have witnessed generations of secrets, laughter, and loss. It was a place that once symbolized everything Clara had hoped for in her marriage, a place of tradition, of family, of roots. Now it felt like a tomb. She arrived at the estate in silence, her car's headlights cutting through the rain-soaked night. The mansion loomed ahead, its grandiose silhouette barely visible through the downpour. Clara parked her car and sat there for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She couldn't help but wonder what James was thinking. What had he hoped to accomplish by inviting her here? The air was thick with tension as she stepped out of the car, her shoes sinking into the wet gravel of the driveway. She hesitated for a moment before walking toward the grand entrance. The mansion's stone steps felt cold beneath her feet, each one a reminder of the world she was stepping into, a world of power, secrets, and manipulation. When she reached the front door, it swung open before she could knock. James stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by the dim light behind him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that hinted at regret, something she had never seen in him before. "Clara," he said softly, his voice almost weary. "I'm glad you came." Clara didn't answer immediately. She stood there, rain dripping from her hair, feeling every ounce of her anger, hurt, and confusion rise to the surface. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but her body froze in the face of his presence. He had played his game, manipulated her, and yet here he was, standing in front of her, asking for forgiveness. "You wanted to speak with me?" she finally said, her voice steady despite the chaos within her. James nodded slowly, stepping aside to let her enter. The grand foyer was dark, the faint light from a chandelier casting long shadows across the marble floor. Clara stepped inside, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know if she was ready to hear what he had to say, but she knew she had no choice. He led her into a sitting room, a large space with antique furniture and dark wood paneling. A fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill that gripped her heart. "Clara," James began, sitting across from her. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her feel like he was trying to read her very soul. "I never intended for things to go this far. The test, it was a mistake. Clara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. A mistake? She thought bitterly. It had been more than a mistake. It had been an unforgivable betrayal. Then why? She asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain composed. Why would you do this to me? You manipulated me. You made me question everything I knew about myself. You made me feel like I wasn't worthy of your family's approval, that I had to prove something that wasn't even real. James looked down, his fingers nervously tapping on the arm of his chair. I didn't see it that way, Clara. I thought it was the only way to understand your true character, to see if you were really the woman I believed you to be. But I was wrong. I see that now. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had always admired James for his wisdom, for the authority he carried, but now she saw him for what he truly was, a man who had tried to play God with her life. A man who thought he could control her emotions, her actions, as if they were his to dictate. You had no right to do that, Clara said, her voice cold now, the heat of her anger finally catching up with her. You had no right to turn me into a test subject, to manipulate me for your own purposes.
I'm not your pawn, James.
I'm not anyone's pawn. The words stung, and Clara saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or shame. But it didn't matter. It was too late for apologies. You've broken something inside me, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. I came here for answers, but all I have now are more questions. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I can go back to the life I had, to the marriage I thought was real. James didn't speak at first, his gaze shifting away from her. The room was thick with the weight of her words, and for the first time, Clara felt the true depth of the chasm between them. What had once seemed like a marriage built on love and trust now felt like a fragile illusion, one that had shattered the moment James decided to play God. With her heart. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice filled with regret, but Clara knew that words were no longer enough. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, like the heavy fog that had rolled in outside. Clara could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, pushing the air from her lungs. The fire in the hearth crackled, but it felt distant, almost foreign, like the warmth of a memory she no longer recognized. She sat there, her heart in tatters, torn between the need for answers and the fear that those answers would only bring more pain. James sat across from her, his face drawn with regret, but Clara couldn't find it in herself to feel sorry for him. He had crossed a line, one that could never be erased. His actions had shattered everything she thought she knew about herself, about her place in the world, and about the man she had married. He had manipulated her, twisted her emotions for his own sense of control, and now, as he sat before her, all she could feel was an overwhelming sense of betrayal. You don't get it, do you? Clara's voice was quiet, but edged with an undercurrent of anger. You think a few words of regret can fix this? You think that just because you admit it was a mistake, everything will go back to normal? She shook her head, the words bitter on her tongue. It doesn't work like that. You can't just undo what you've done. You can't erase the damage you've caused. James shifted in his seat, his eyes never leaving hers. There was a vulnerability there now, a crack in the facade of the powerful man he had always been. But it didn't matter. Clara had seen too much, felt too much, to simply forgive him. She had loved him, trusted him, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered heart. I know I can't undo it, James said, his voice breaking. I know I can't fix this. But Clara, I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I never thought it would go this far. Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to tell him how deeply he had hurt her. But the words caught in her throat, leaving her feeling empty, hollow. How could she explain the pain she felt, the overwhelming sense of being betrayed by the person who was supposed to protect her? How could she make him understand that his apology was just a fleeting moment, one that would never be enough to heal the wounds he had inflicted? You were never supposed to be a test, James continued, his voice shaky. I thought I was doing what was best for you, for Daniel, for our family. But now I see that I was wrong. I see that I've ruined everything. Clara looked at him, her gaze cold and unwavering. You didn't just ruin everything, James, she said, her voice trembling. You destroyed me. I don't even know who I am anymore. You've taken away the one thing I thought I had, trust. You've made me doubt myself, made me question my worth. A sob caught in Clara's throat, and for a moment, she felt the familiar sting of tears behind her eyes. But she refused to let them fall. She refused to let him see her break. Not after everything he had done. James reached out, his hand trembling as he tried to bridge the gap between them. Clara, please don't do this. I can't lose you. I love you. I've always loved you. Clara recoiled, the words hitting her like a slap. She wanted to scream, to tell him that love didn't come with conditions, that love didn't manipulate, didn't control. Love didn't break someone down and then expect them to forgive and forget. But the words she needed to say stuck in her throat, tangled in the web of emotion that was choking her. You think you can just say that and everything will be okay? Clara whispered, her voice raw with pain. You think that love will fix this? You've taken everything from me, James. My trust, my dignity, my peace. And now you want me to just forgive you? To pretend that nothing happened? James' face crumpled, and for the first time, Clara saw him as a broken man. The man who had once been so confident, so sure of himself, now looked like a shell of the person he had been. His eyes were filled with guilt, but that didn't change the fact that he had destroyed something precious, something that could never be repaired. I don't know how to make this right, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I will try. I will do anything to make it up to you, Clara. Anything. Clara shook her head, standing up abruptly. She couldn't sit there any longer. She couldn't bear to look at him, to hear the words that would never be enough. She felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of her emotions, by the realization that her life, her love, had been a lie. I can't do this, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. I need to leave. I need to get away from all of this. I need time to think, to breathe. I can't be here with you right now. She turned to leave, but James reached out again, his hand desperate, pleading. Clara, please don't go. We can fix this. I promise you, we can fix this. I won't stop trying. But Clara didn't stop. She couldn't. The hurt was too deep, too consuming. She didn't know what the future held, whether she would ever be able to forgive him, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay here, not in this place, not in this moment. As she walked out of the room, the door closing softly behind her, Clara felt a sense of finality settle over her. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. She couldn't go back to the life she had known. The trust she had once placed in Daniel, in his family, had been shattered. And though she didn't know what came next, she knew that it was time for her to find herself again, to rebuild the parts of her that had been lost in the wreckage of betrayal. The rain had stopped as Clara stepped outside, the air now cool and crisp, the world around her eerily silent. She paused for a moment, taking in the stillness, the weight of everything that had transpired hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. She didn't know what the future held, whether she would ever find peace, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. She was still here. She was still breathing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. With a deep breath, Clara turned and walked into the night, her heart heavy but resolute. The journey ahead would be long, but she was determined to find her way. Alone if she had to be. The days that followed were a blur of silent nights and restless mornings. Clara had retreated into herself, pulling away from everything that once gave her comfort. She avoided phone calls, ignored messages, and kept her distance from the world around her. Her heart was broken, her trust shattered, and no words of apology could heal the deep wounds that had been left behind. But as time passed, something changed. Slowly, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the dark night, Clara began to piece her life back together. She started spending time with herself, rediscovering the things she had once loved but had forgotten in the whirlwind of her marriage. She took walks in the park, read books she hadn't touched in years, and allowed herself the quiet moments of peace she had been deprived of. Each day, she felt a little stronger, a little more sure of herself. She was beginning to remember who she was before the pain, before the betrayal. One evening, as she sat on her balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Clara heard a familiar sound. Her phone buzzed once, then twice. She looked at the screen and saw a message from Daniel. The same name that had once made her heart leap now felt like a weight in her chest. She stared at the message for a long time before she opened it. "Clara, I know you need time. I won't ask for your forgiveness yet, but I hope someday you'll see that I love you. Please remember that no matter what happens, you are the most important person in my life. I won't stop fighting for us." The words were simple, but they struck her deeply. There was a part of her that still loved him, that still longed for the man she had once shared her life with. But there was also a part of her that knew she couldn't go back. Not yet, at least. Not until she had fully healed. Not until she had rediscovered the woman she was before all of this began. Her thumb hovered over the screen as she debated how to respond. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him, but she knew she couldn't keep living in this limbo. She typed a few words, her fingers trembling slightly as she hit send. "I don't know what the future holds, Daniel. But I can't promise anything right now. I need to be whole again before I can make any decisions." Clara set the phone down and looked out at the skyline. The world was still, but she knew that within her, something was changing. She was no longer defined by the past or by the man who had broken her. She was redefining herself, carving a path toward a future that was hers alone. The next few weeks were full of small victories. Clara had begun to take control of her life again, making decisions based on her own needs and desires. The emptiness that had once consumed her was slowly being filled with hope. She was healing, not because of anyone else's apology, but because she had decided to heal for herself. One night, as Clara stood in front of her mirror, she saw the woman who had been buried beneath the pain, the woman who had once been strong, confident, and full of life. She had found her way back to herself, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled at the reflection that stared back at her. But the journey wasn't over. There were still scars, still questions that lingered in her heart. Could she ever forgive Daniel? Could she rebuild the trust that had been shattered? She didn't have the answers, but she no longer needed to know them all at once. As the months went by, Clara continued her journey, each day taking one step closer to the peace she had longed for. She stayed true to herself, no longer seeking approval or validation from others. She learned that the most important relationship she could have was the one with herself. And as the seasons changed, Clara found herself walking through the city again. Only this time, it was different. She wasn't running from her past. She was embracing it, knowing that it had shaped her into the woman she had become. The city, once a place of heartache, now felt like a place of opportunity. She was free to live her life on her own terms. But there was still one last thing she needed to do. She had a message for anyone watching her journey, anyone who had been touched by her story. The camera faded in slowly, capturing Clara standing in front of a peaceful sunset, her face calm yet determined. The breeze played with her hair, and her eyes shimmered with the quiet strength that had been reborn from the ashes of her past. To everyone watching, remember that life is full of twists and turns, but the most important thing is never to lose yourself. Never let anyone take away your peace or your self-worth. No matter how broken you may feel, you can always rebuild, and you can always choose to move forward. She paused for a moment, as if letting the words sink in. Her expression softened, and a gentle smile tugged at her lips. If my story has resonated with you, if you've found even a small piece of yourself in this journey, please subscribe to my channel. I want to share more stories, more lessons, and more of this journey with you. Together, we can find strength, we can heal, and we can build a better future. The screen faded to black as soft music played in the background, leaving the viewers with a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. Clara's story was far from over, but now she was ready to face whatever came next, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. And as the words "subscribe for more" appeared on the screen, Clara's message echoed in the hearts of those who had followed her story. Never give up on yourself. Keep moving forward no matter what.